Imagine spending a year planning your dream wedding, only to have your father cancel 5 days before. He swore he would wear black in the back row to protest my selfishness. But what if that familiar toxicity was actually a desperate smokescreen hiding a multi-million-dollar federal crime? My fiancé and I uncovered the truth, turning my walk down the aisle into an elegant, ruthless trap. Sit down, because this secret will burn everything. Welcome to Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without an operating budget. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on the screen or clicking the donation link in the description or comments below. Now, let me introduce myself. I am Danielle Shepard. I am 32 years old, and I work as the lead architect at Lumina Crest Designs. My entire career is built on creating structures that are stable, logical, and resilient. My fiancé, Julian, is cut from the exact same cloth. He is a highly sought-after cybersecurity data analyst. While I build physical fortresses, Julian builds digital ones. Together, we designed a life of absolute order and peace, carefully insulated from the suffocating, irrational drama that had defined my entire childhood. Our wedding was meant to be the ultimate celebration of that peaceful life. We had spent an entire year planning a breathtaking ceremony at an exclusive private ski resort in Aspen, Colorado. We did not ask for a single penny from my family. Julian and I paid the entire $200,000 cost in cash. We handled every vendor, every flight, and every detail ourselves. It was an extravagant, flawless event, and we were incredibly proud of it. Everything was perfectly in place, until the phone rang 4 days before we were scheduled to say our vows. I saw my father Marcus calling and answered on speakerphone, expecting a mundane question about his flight details. Instead, the air in my kitchen instantly turned freezing. "I am not walking you down the aisle, Danielle," Marcus stated. His voice was flat, carrying no hint of sorrow or apology. It was a calculated strike. I froze, staring at my carefully color-coded wedding itinerary on my laptop screen. "Excuse me? What are you talking about?" "It is your sister," Marcus sighed, his tone dripping with an exaggerated theatrical weariness. "Harper is having a complete nervous breakdown. She simply cannot handle this." I closed my eyes. Harper, my 29-year-old sister, was a chronic narcissist who paraded around Chicago claiming to be a high-society art gallery owner. In reality, she was completely unemployed, deeply in debt, and fully subsidized by my parents. "And what exactly does my wedding have to do with Harper having a breakdown?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain perfectly level. "Your extravagant little show in Aspen is mocking her failures," Marcus snapped, his temper suddenly flaring. "It is incredibly selfish. Danielle, you know she is struggling right now, and you just had to flaunt a massive mountain resort wedding in her face to make her feel inferior." Before I could even process the sheer absurdity of being called selfish for paying for my own wedding, the phone shifted. My mother, Eleanor, snatched the receiver. "Danielle, listen to me right now," Eleanor commanded, her voice shrill and leaving no room for negotiation. "You need to cancel the Aspen venue immediately. Call them and demand a refund. We found a lovely, quiet community hall right back here in Chicago. You can get married here on the same day. It will protect Harper's fragile peace, and the family can still be together without causing a scene." I looked across the kitchen island at Julian. He had stopped typing on his computer, his eyes wide with disbelief. Cancel a massive destination wedding 4 days out? Forfeit hundreds of thousands of dollars to cater to the bruised ego of a 29-year-old woman who refused to get a job? "Absolutely not," I said, my voice dropping to a frigid, unyielding whisper. "I am not canceling my venue. I am not losing my money. And I am certainly not moving my wedding to a cheap hall in Chicago just because Harper is throwing another tantrum." A heavy, suffocating silence hung on the line. I could hear my mother scoff in the background before Marcus took the phone back. The false weariness was gone. Now, he sounded vicious. "Fine. Marcus hissed through his teeth. "If you want to be a heartless brat, then go ahead and have your ridiculous Aspen wedding. But hear this, your mother, your sister, and I will still be there. We are going to wear solid black mourning clothes. We will sit in the very last row of the venue, and we will sit back and watch you walk down that aisle completely alone, in front of all your fancy new friends. Let everyone see exactly what kind of ungrateful daughter you really are." The line went dead. The sharp click echoed in our quiet kitchen. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just set my phone down with a chilling calmness. It was a survival mechanism I had perfected over 3 decades. I assumed this was just another classic move by my family to punish me for being independent. But Julian did not offer me a sympathetic hug. He did not look angry at them. He looked entirely analytical. He leaned forward, tapping his fingers slowly against the granite countertop. "Danielle," Julian said quietly, his eyes dark with sudden realization. "Think about what just happened." I rubbed my temples, exhausted. "I know. They want to humiliate me and ruin the day." "No," Julian interrupted, his voice sharpening with razor precision. "Think about your father. Marcus is a man who is obsessed with his high society image. He practically begs to be around wealthy people. Half of our guest list consists of elite tech executives and millionaire investors from my firm. Marcus would never, ever pass up the chance to network with that kind of money. And he would definitely never publicly embarrass himself by wearing funeral clothes in the back row of a luxury resort." Julian stood up abruptly and grabbed his laptop. "He is terrified of Aspen. He is using Harper as a shield to force you to move the wedding back to Chicago, because he cannot set foot in that specific resort. Danielle, your father is not throwing a tantrum. He is hiding." Julian did not waste another second. He walked straight to his home office, his mind already shifting from the role of a supportive fiancé to a forensic data analyst. I followed him, watching as he woke up his primary workstation. 3 large monitors illuminated the dark room with a harsh, cold light. "Your father thrives on the illusion of power," Julian said, his fingers flying across his mechanical keyboard with rhythmic precision. "He treats wealthy people like oxygen. Half of the executives attending our ceremony could fund his entire firm with a single signature. For him to willingly abandon a room full of elite investors, he has to be running from a threat so severe that it overrides his fundamental greed." I stood behind his chair, my eyes scanning the cascading lines of code and data queries filling the screens. Julian was utilizing a specialized, encrypted network he often used for tracking corporate vulnerabilities. He bypassed standard search engines and dove directly into the digital public records, property registries, and offshore shell company filings connected to Marcus's real estate investment firm. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rapid clicking of keys. Then, the left monitor blinked, displaying a massive, heavily redacted spreadsheet. Julian ran a decryption script, peeling back the blacked-out lines one by one. "Here is the bleeding," Julian muttered, his eyes darting across the screen. "Your father has been projecting this image of a highly successful commercial real estate tycoon. But look at these back-end records. He has over a dozen secret defaults buried under phantom limited liability companies. Creditors are circling. He is facing imminent foreclosure on 3 different commercial properties, and the debt ratio is staggering. He is drowning in millions of dollars of hidden liabilities." Before I could even process the magnitude of my father's financial ruin, my cell phone vibrated violently against the desk. The sudden noise made both of us jump. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was an urgent text message from Vance. Vance was a brilliant, self-made billionaire venture capitalist. He was also my sister Harper's estranged husband. They had been separated for over 8 months because Vance finally grew exhausted of funding Harper's lavish, empty lifestyle and her constant manipulation. He rarely contacted me directly unless it was an absolute emergency. The message read, "I need to see you and Julian right now. Meet me at the private lounge in the Sterling Hotel in 20 minutes. Do not tell your family." Julian and I exchanged a single, sharp look. We grabbed our coats and left. The drive to the Sterling Hotel was agonizingly tense. We arrived exactly 20 minutes later. The private lounge was dimly lit, reeking of expensive leather and aged whiskey. Vance was sitting alone in a high-backed corner booth. He looked terrible. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, and he was gripping a glass of scotch with white knuckles. As we slid into the booth across from him, Vance looked at me with a mixture of deep pity and sheer exhaustion. "Danielle, I'm so sorry," Vance started, his voice thick with tension. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I handled the lawsuit. You do not have to worry about going to prison." I stared at him, the air leaving my lungs. "Vance, what are you talking about? What lawsuit?" Vance blinked, leaning forward. "The breach of contract suit. Your parents and Harper came to my penthouse yesterday. They were in absolute hysterics. Harper was sobbing uncontrollably. Your father told me that your wedding went catastrophically over budget, that you were completely bankrupt, and the Aspen Resort was suing you for severe financial damages. They swore you were facing federal wire fraud charges because you bounced massive checks across state lines." A cold, sickening dread began to pool in my stomach. Julian placed a steady hand on my knee under the table. "Keep going," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Marcus begged me to help," Vance continued, rubbing his face. "He said you were too proud to ask me for money, and that you were contemplating doing something drastic to escape the humiliation, despite everything between me and Harper. I always viewed you as a little sister. Danielle, I was not going to let you go down for a stupid financial mistake. So, I paid it. I wired $500,000 into the legal escrow account your father provided to settle the resort's debt and keep you out of federal court." The silence that followed his words was deafening. The lounge felt like a vacuum. My hands shook as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened my private banking application, navigated to our shared wedding fund, and pulled up the finalized invoices. I pushed the glowing screen across the polished wooden table toward Vance. "Look at the dates." "Vance," I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it felt like ice in my veins. "Julian and I paid for the venue, the catering, and the accommodations over 6 months ago. Every single vendor is paid in full. There is no lawsuit. We do not owe a single dime to that resort, or to anyone else on this earth." Vance stared at the zero balance on the invoice screen. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale as a ghost. His eyes flicked from my phone to my face, the horrific realization hitting him like a physical blow. "He lied," Vance breathed out, the words choking him. "He took $500,000 from me." "He did not just take it," Julian corrected, his tone turning clinical and lethal. "Marcus weaponized Danielle's wedding. He knew you would not hand over that kind of cash to save his failing business, so he used the one person you actually care about. He used his own daughter's meticulously planned day of joy as a tool for extortion." The sheer audacity of the betrayal hit us all simultaneously. My family had not just tried to ruin my wedding out of spite, they had used my happiness as a prop to execute a massive, fraudulent heist against my brother-in-law. The petty family drama I thought I was dealing with had just evaporated. We were no longer dealing with toxic relatives throwing a tantrum. We were dealing with desperate, cornered criminals. The air in the lounge grew completely sterile as Julian flipped open his laptop right there on the polished mahogany table. He did not offer any words of comfort to Vance. Instead, he connected directly to Vance's secured network and demanded the routing numbers for the $500,000 that had been wired that morning. Vance handed over his phone. "It went to a legal escrow account," Vance muttered, still looking shell-shocked. "There is no legal escrow," Julian replied, his fingers a blur across the keys. "That is a dummy account. Let us see where your money actually landed." I sat perfectly still, my mind detaching from the emotional horror of my family's betrayal and slipping into a state of absolute, frigid clarity. We watched the screens as Julian unleashed a tracing algorithm. Within minutes, the digital footprint of the wire transfer materialized. The money had not stayed in the initial account for more than 60 seconds. It had immediately splintered into dozens of microtransactions, funneling through a labyrinth of offshore shell corporations. "He is not just paying off bad debts," Julian observed, his voice dropping into a register of pure forensic fascination. Marcus is running a massive, sophisticated Ponzi scheme. Look at these ledgers. He has been fabricating commercial real estate deeds for ghost properties. He is selling equity in office buildings he does not even own, taking capital from new investors to pay off the dividends of the older ones. And your $500,000, Vance, was just injected to plug a catastrophic leak before the whole pyramid collapses. Vance clenched his jaw so hard I thought his teeth would shatter. Who is the primary victim? Who is he trying to pay off before they notice the missing capital? Julian Cross referenced the shell company payouts with public corporate registries. A moment later, a single corporate logo filled the screen. The name of the holding group read Pinnacle Vanguard Holdings. Julian froze. He slowly turned his head to look at me, and I felt the temperature in the room drop another 10 degrees. Danielle, Julian said quietly, Pinnacle Vanguard Holdings is the parent company that owns the Aspen Mountain Resort. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening precision. My father had not suddenly developed a moral objection to my wedding. He was actively defrauding the exact corporate entity that owned the venue. Wait, I breathed out, the complete picture finally coming into focus. Julian, your guest list, the executives you invited from your security firm's client roster. Yes, Julian confirmed, his eyes hardening into dark stones. 4 members of the Pinnacle Vanguard Board of Directors are attending our ceremony. If Marcus walked into that resort, he would be standing shoulder to shoulder with the very men he is currently robbing blind. They would recognize him. They would ask about their investments. The fraud would be exposed instantly. That is why he demanded you move the wedding to Chicago, Vance concluded, his voice trembling with a lethal mixture of rage and disgust. He used Harper's fake mental breakdown to force a venue change because showing up in Aspen meant walking straight into his own execution. But what about Harper? Why was she so desperate to help him extort me? Julian's fingers went back to work, tracing the second half of Vance's stolen money. The data stream led across the Atlantic. Because Harper is his laundry machine, Julian stated plainly. She does not own a legitimate art gallery. She is using her business as a front to wash the dirty money. Look at these import records. She has been buying worthless, forged classical paintings from black markets in Europe, appraising them at grossly inflated values, and moving your father's Ponzi cash through the sales. She takes a massive cut to pay off her own disastrous personal debts from her fake luxury lifestyle, and funnels the rest back to Marcus to keep the pyramid standing. Vance stood up violently. His chair crashed backward against the dark wood paneling of the lounge. His face was flushed with absolute fury. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. I am calling the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now. Vance snarled, his thumb hovering over the keypad. I am going to have them all dragged out of their beds in handcuffs tonight. They are done. They are all going to federal prison. No, I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried a weight so heavy and absolute that Vance stopped dead in his tracks. He stared down at me, incredulous. Danielle, they stole $500,000 from me and tried to destroy your wedding to cover it up, Vance argued, his chest heaving. What do you mean, no? I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my jacket. I felt no sorrow. I felt no heartbreak. The daughter who had spent 32 years trying to win the approval of a toxic family was completely dead. In her place stood an architect who had just been handed the blueprints to a flawless demolition. If you call the authorities right now, Vance, you give them a window, I explained, my tone entirely analytical and devoid of mercy. Marcus is backed into a corner. If he catches even a whisper of an investigation, he will wire whatever stolen assets he has left to an untouchable offshore account and board a flight to a non-extradition country before the sun comes up. Harper will destroy the forged art and burn her gallery records. They will scatter. Vance slowly lowered his phone, the logic of my words cutting through his blinding rage. Then what do? We do exactly what they want, I replied, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. We give them silence. We let Marcus, Eleanor, and Harper believed their psychological manipulation worked. We let them believe I am crushed, compliant, and utterly oblivious to their crimes. That false sense of security is the only thing that will keep them anchored in the United States for the next 4 days. Julian stepped up beside me, closing his laptop. He already understood the architecture of my vengeance. "You want to trap them at the venue," he said. "They threatened to wear black mourning clothes and sit in the very last row of my wedding to watch me suffer," I said, looking between Julian and Vance. "I say we let them. We give them exactly the seats they demanded. But we do not just let them sit there. We turn that back row into a digital cage. We use Julian's network access to build an automated trap, and we spring it the moment I walk down that aisle." Vance stared at me, the fury in his eyes slowly transforming into a dark, calculating respect. He slowly picked up his fallen chair and set it right. "I will deploy my entire legal team to assist Julian with the data compilation." Vance agreed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "We will build a dossier so completely bulletproof that they will not have a single second to mount a defense." "Exactly," I said. "We do not just expose them. We obliterate their entire empire in a single, inescapable moment. They wanted to make my wedding unforgettable. We are going to give them a memory that will haunt them for the rest of their miserable lives." For the next 48 hours, my cell phone became a relentless beacon of manufactured misery. My mother and sister unleashed a coordinated, psychological bombardment designed to break my spirit and force me into submission. Dozens of text messages flooded my screen, painting Harper as a fragile victim teetering on the edge of a breakdown, all because of my supposed cruelty. When texts did not elicit a rapid response, the voicemails began. I would sit in the quiet of my living room, sipping my morning coffee, and listen to Eleanor crying on the speakerphone. Her sobs were incredibly theatrical, pausing at perfect intervals to ensure the guilt trip landed. Harper left messages too, her voice trembling as she begged me to just be a good sister and move the wedding back to a cheap hall in Chicago. In the past, this relentless emotional extortion would have paralyzed me. I would have folded, apologized, and shrunk myself down to accommodate their madness. But now, everything had changed. I listened to their fake tears with the detached, analytical curiosity of a scientist observing a trapped insect. I did not block their numbers or argue back. I needed them to believe their manipulation was working flawlessly. I needed them to feel victorious, arrogant, and completely safe. While they wasted their energy performing a tragedy, I was methodically setting the stage for their real downfall. I called my wedding planner, a meticulous woman who was understandably panicked by the sudden familial drama I had vaguely alluded to. I spoke to her with a voice so calm and authoritative that it immediately halted her nervous rambling. I instructed her to adjust the seating chart for the ceremony. She was to place exactly 3 chairs in the absolute furthest, darkest corner of the grand hall. They were to be positioned behind a massive structural pillar, near the drafty service exit, completely isolated from the rest of the guests. I wanted them to have the exact punishment they had arrogantly threatened me with. It was no longer a seating arrangement. It was a designated quarantine zone. Meanwhile, our apartment had been transformed into a digital war room. Julian had not slept in 2 days. He was locked in a relentless, synchronized workflow with Vance's elite corporate legal team. Through secure encrypted channels, they spent every waking hour translating the chaotic web of Marcus's financial crimes into a lethal, undeniable legal dossier. They documented every fabricated deed, traced every laundered dollar passing through Harper's fake art gallery, and mapped the entire architecture of the massive Ponzi scheme. They compiled a mountain of irrefutable evidence proving wire fraud, extortion, and money laundering. It was a masterpiece of forensic destruction. Late Saturday night, Julian called me into his office. The blue light from his monitors cast sharp shadows across his exhausted but fiercely determined face. He pointed to a single line of code blinking steadily on the center screen. "The payload is ready," Julian announced, his voice hoarse but completely steady. I have built an automated execution script on a secure, untraceable proxy server. It is linked directly to Vance's corporate legal software. All I need is the execution time. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I replied without hesitation. Tomorrow, set the timer for exactly 4 o'clock. That is the precise moment the doors will open and I will step into the aisle. Julian nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard to lock in the countdown. He explained the sequence of events the script would trigger. In the very second the clock struck 4, the digital trap would snap shut. A customized malware protocol would deploy into Marcus's corporate network, instantly changing his administrative credentials and locking him out of his own servers. Simultaneously, Vance's lawyers had prepared automated legal injunctions that would electronically freeze all of Harper's domestic and offshore bank accounts. Finally, the system would unleash a mass encrypted email dispatch. The complete, unredacted criminal dossier would be delivered straight to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Financial Crimes Division, the board of directors at Pinnacle Vanguard Holdings, and every single creditor Marcus was desperately trying to hide from. Sunday morning arrived with the breathtaking, crisp perfection that only the Colorado mountains could offer. The air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and fresh snow. I sat in the bridal suite, wrapped in a silk robe, watching my reflection in the vanity mirror as the makeup artist applied the finishing touches. I felt incredibly powerful. My phone lit up on the vanity table. It was a final, venomous text message from my mother. It read, "We are boarding the flight. We will see you in the back row. Enjoy your solitude today. You brought this entirely upon yourself." I stared at the glowing screen. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness. I just smiled, a gentle, chilling curve of my lips. My mother thought she was holding the executioner's axe. She had no idea that her head, along with my father's and sister's, was already resting quietly on the chopping block, and the heavy iron blade of the guillotine had already begun to fall. The grand hall of the Aspen Mountain Resort was nothing short of a monolithic masterpiece of winter architecture. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows framed the jagged, snow-covered peaks outside, while inside, thousands of crystals dripped from the vaulted ceiling, catching the light like frozen rain. The air was thick with the elegant scent of white winter roses and frosted willow branches. The room was absolutely packed. 250 of the most influential, wealthy, and powerful individuals in the country sat in immaculately arranged rows of velvet chairs. Among them, seated in the absolute premium front rows, were the heavyweights of the financial sector. There sat the board of directors from Pinnacle Vanguard Holdings, wearing tailored suits, exchanging polite laughter, and completely oblivious to the fact that the man who had been silently draining their corporate accounts was about to walk into the very same room. At 10 minutes before 4 o'clock, the side entrance near the back of the hall clicked open. In walked Marcus, Eleanor, and Harper. They moved like a dark stain spreading across a pristine white canvas. They had entirely bypassed the pre-ceremony cocktail reception, opting to arrive at the last possible second. They were dressed exactly as they had violently threatened. They wore solid, heavy, pitch-black mourning attire, a jarring and deeply offensive contrast to the joyous, luminous aesthetic of the wedding. Eleanor wore a high-necked dark gown, wrapping a black shawl around her shoulders with an air of profound, theatrical suffering. Harper was draped in a black designer dress that looked better suited for a mafia funeral than a celebration, her posture stiff with practiced superiority. Marcus wore a stark, unembellished black suit, his face set in a cold, unforgiving mask. They walked with deliberate, arrogant strides, parading their protest. However, Marcus kept his head slightly lowered, his eyes darting nervously toward the front of the cavernous hall. He was executing a desperate gamble. He believed that by staying in the absolute darkest, furthest corner of the room, shielded by a massive structural pillar, he could hide from the Pinnacle Vanguard executives sitting 80 feet away. He thought he could satisfy his cruel desire to watch my public humiliation while simultaneously keeping his massive Ponzi scheme hidden in the shadows. The ushers, strictly following my previous orders, guided them to the 3 isolated chairs in the back corner, the designated quarantine zone. They sat down. Harper crossed her legs, a smug, contemptuous smirk playing on her lips. She tapped her pristine fingernails against her clutch, undoubtedly thinking about the $500,000 she believed she had successfully laundered to secure her fake, luxurious life. Eleanor leaned over and whispered something sharp and cruel into Marcus's ear. A wicked gleam in her eye. They were practically vibrating with anticipation. They were waiting for the ultimate payoff. They wanted the majestic orchestral music to begin. They wanted the heavy oak doors to swing open, and they wanted to watch me step out into the aisle completely alone, abandoned by my father, and utterly humiliated in front of 250 elite guests. The minutes ticked down with agonizing slowness. 3:58, 3:59. The hushed, sophisticated murmurs of the crowd began to fade as the officiant stepped up to the altar. A heavy, expectant silence blanketed the room. 4 o'clock. The exact minute the digital guillotine was programmed to fall, the overhead lights dimmed into a soft, romantic glow. A live string quartet positioned on the balcony began to play a deep, resonant, sweeping melody that commanded the attention of every soul in the room. At the end of the long white aisle, the massive double oak doors remained closed for 3 agonizingly long seconds. The tension in the room pulled tight like a wire. Then, the heavy brass handles turned, the doors swung open wide, unleashing a flood of golden light from the foyer behind me. I stepped into the threshold. I did not look broken. I did not look abandoned. I stood tall, my posture rigid with absolute strength, my white gown catching the light in a brilliant display of elegance. I was radiant, but I was not the sight that made the entire room draw a collective, sharp breath. It was the man standing firmly beside me, standing tall, radiating an aura of terrifying, unyielding authority, was Vance. He was dressed in a flawless midnight blue tuxedo, his broad shoulders squared, his jaw set like carved granite. His presence was a physical force, dominating the space around him. This was the billionaire husband Harper had sworn was entirely oblivious to her crimes. This was the man my father had stolen $500,000 from just 3 days prior. Vance extended his arm with protective pride, and I gracefully looped my hand through his. The visual shockwave hit the back row with the destructive force of a freight train. From my vantage point at the top of the aisle, I watched the arrogant, triumphant smirks on my family's faces melt into expressions of pure, unadulterated horror. The transformation was instantaneous and brutal. Harper was the first to shatter. Her smug, rigid posture collapsed inward. She gripped the velvet arms of her chair so hard her knuckles turned stark white. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers, her mouth falling open in a silent scream of panic as she stared at her estranged husband standing beside the sister she had just tried to destroy. The reality of the situation crashed down on her in a fraction of a second. Vance was here. Vance was holding my arm. That meant Vance knew absolutely everything. Her lies, her fake gallery, her money laundering, the stolen $500,000, all of it was pulverized in an instant. Eleanor gasped so violently it looked as though the oxygen had been physically punched out of her lungs. She clutched her chest, her face turning a sickly, translucent shade of gray. Her theatrical mourning suddenly replaced by genuine, suffocating dread. But Marcus's reaction was the most profound. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and distinctly heard the mechanical click beneath his boot. He stared at Vance, the blood draining entirely from his face until he resembled a freshly exhumed corpse. He began to tremble. Then, to make matters infinitely worse for him, the guests in the front rows began to turn around in their seats to look at the bride, the pinnacle Vanguard executives. The very men Marcus had defrauded out of millions were now turning their faces toward the back of the room. Marcus shrank violently into his chair, trying to merge with the shadows of the concrete pillar, suffocating under the crushing weight of his collapsing reality. He could not run. He could not stand up. If he made a single sudden movement, he would draw the attention of the executives and be recognized immediately. He was trapped. Vance and I began to walk. The pace was agonizingly slow, deliberate. Every single step I took down that white carpet was a methodical strike against the empire of manipulation they had built. The sweeping music filled the cavernous hall, masking the heavy predatory sound of Vance's footsteps. The guests smiled warmly at us, completely unaware of the psychological execution taking place in the darkest corner of the room. Vance kept his eyes locked dead ahead, his face a mask of terrifying calm. Until we reached the midway point of the hall. As we approached the final rows, the air around my family seemed to physically freeze. They were pinned down by the sheer paralyzing terror of the moment. They were forced to sit in absolute silence as their destruction marched toward them. We reached the back row. We did not simply walk past them. Vance stopped. The entire bridal procession came to a sudden halt. The guests behind us assumed Vance was merely taking a poignant moment to compose himself before handing me over to my groom. But Vance did not look toward the altar. He turned his head slowly. His cold, furious eyes locked onto the three pathetic figures cowering in the shadows behind the pillar. He leaned down slightly, his face just inches away from Marcus and Harper. He did not yell. He did not cause a scene. He simply parted his lips and delivered a single, perfectly enunciated sentence that froze the blood in their veins. "The FBI has the ledger." Vance straightened up, his face returning to a mask of absolute, wealthy indifference. He did not wait for a single word of response from my father or my sister. He simply adjusted his grip on my arm, looked straight ahead toward the altar, and guided me away from the darkness. We left them drowning in the suffocating wake of his words. When we reached the altar, Vance carefully placed my hand into Julian's. The two men exchanged a single, silent nod of profound mutual respect. Vance then took his seat in the front row, directly behind the Pinnacle Vanguard executives. The music faded into a soft, romantic hum, and the officiant began his welcoming address. The ceremony was breathtaking, bathed in golden light and surrounded by genuine love, completely untouched by the poison sitting in the back corner of the room. But the absolute destruction of my family had already begun. Right as I handed my bouquet to my maid of honor and turned to face Julian for our vows, the silent digital warfare Julian had programmed unleashed its full fury. In the back row, 3 cell phones began to vibrate simultaneously. It was not a single notification. It was a relentless, synchronized buzzing, like a swarm of angry hornets trapped against the velvet cushions. Harper grabbed her phone first, her hands shaking violently. Her screen illuminated the dim corner. The first notification was an automated alert from her elite banking institution. Her primary checking account was completely frozen. The second alert showed her offshore savings account was locked under a federal injunction. Then came the email. It was from the senior partner at Vance's legal firm. The subject line read, "Emergency dissolution of marriage and formal notification of fraud litigation." Attached were over 200 pages of meticulously documented evidence proving her money laundering and art forgery schemes. Her eyes darted wildly across the screen, her chest heaving as she realized she was not just divorced, she was entirely destitute and facing federal prison. Next to her, Marcus slowly pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. His hands were slick with cold sweat. His screen was flooded with critical server failure alerts, indicating that he had been entirely locked out of his own corporate network. But the killing blow was the email that Julian's proxy server had automatically copied him on. Marcus read the recipient list. It was addressed to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but the copied recipients were the exact men sitting 80 feet in front of him, the board of directors of Pinnacle Vanguard Holdings. The email contained the complete, unredacted ledger of his Ponzi scheme, including the forged deeds and the stolen $500,000. Marcus slowly raised his head, his eyes terrified and hollow. He looked toward the front rows. Several of the wealthy executives were already subtly checking their own vibrating phones. My family was trapped in the most elegant prison ever constructed. They could not scream. They could not cry out. They could not even stand up and run toward the exit, because any sudden movement would immediately draw the attention of the entire room. If Marcus drew the eyes of the Pinnacle Vanguard board members right as they were opening those emails, he would be physically detained by their private security team before he even reached the lobby. So, they had to sit there. For 45 agonizing minutes, Marcus, Eleanor, and Harper were forced to sit in absolute, paralyzed silence. They were trapped in the dark mourning clothes they had chosen to wear as a mockery, suffocating in their own terror. While they watched me shine, they had to listen to Julian and me exchange our vows. They had to watch as we slid the rings onto each other's fingers. They had to witness the explosive, joyous applause of 250 powerful people when the officiant pronounced us husband and wife. Julian and I kissed, and the string quartet erupted into a triumphant, upbeat symphony. We turned and walked back down the aisle together. We were radiant. We did not even glance at the back corner. They were completely invisible to us. As the guests began to stand and the crowd's attention shifted toward the cocktail hour, my family saw their only window to escape, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Marcus, Eleanor, and Harper quietly pushed their chairs back and slipped out through the heavy service doors. They thought they could sneak out the back of the resort, hail a private car, and disappear before the authorities could verify Julian's dossier. But they severely underestimated Julian's precision. The moment they pushed through the service doors and stumbled into the main resort lobby, they froze. The lobby was entirely cleared of guests. Instead, standing in a perfect semicircle blocking all the exits, were 12 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers. The regional director stepped forward, holding a thick, printed folder. It was Julian's dossier. Without a single word of negotiation, the agents moved in. The sharp and cold sound of steel handcuffs clicking shut echoed off the marble floors. Eleanor finally let out a genuine, piercing sob, but no one was there to offer her sympathy. They were escorted out of the glass doors and pushed into the back of waiting black vehicles. Their toxic, fraudulent empire was dismantled in a single afternoon. As the federal vehicles drove away down the snowy mountain road, Julian and I stepped into our grand reception. The champagne was flowing, the music was lively, and the air was completely pure. We had closed the darkest chapter of my life and opened the door to a brilliant, unburdened future. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please let me know in the comments. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping our team. Since YouTube demonetized our channel, we rely completely on the kindness of listeners like you to keep going. Just $1 goes a massive way in helping us pay our staff so they can support their families and continue bringing you the best revenge stories out there. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and take care.